Welcome to another episode of Living with FASD, Candid Conversations with Patti Kasper. I'm your host. And before we dive into this week's episode with special guest Bruna Neptune, I wanted to remind you, if you have not already voted in the Women's Podcasting Awards, it's a, what do you call it, a People's Choice kind of program for female podcasters, then if you haven't already voted for Living with FASD in that, please take a moment when the podcast is over and go to the show notes and then click on the link that will take you to the site where you can do that. So Google's tabulating all the results, which means it's going to ask you a few basic details to make sure you're a real person and I haven't gone out and hired a lot of chat bots. But if you go to womenpodcasters.com/awards-voting, then once you fill all that stuff out, you'll scroll down through the categories and it's society and culture. And then there'll be a drop-down menu and you select Patricia Kasper, Living with FASD. And yeah, as I've said before, there are prizes. I don't even know what they are. I haven't even gone to look because the important piece is the winning the category means visibility. And that means more people learning about fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. And that's what matters the most to me. So thank you. You're such a fabulous audience. I know you're going to get me there this year. So voting continues through May 31st. Please remember only one vote, because if you vote for multiple podcasts, all the votes are going to get tossed. All right. So thank you in advance for that support. And without further ado, I wanted to introduce you to this week's special guest. However, you're only going to be looking at my face because one of the topics we'll be getting into today is cyberbullying. So Miss Bruna is not going to be showing her image online. And it won't matter so much if you're listening to the podcast on Spotify or Audible or Pocket Casts, but for those of you who are used to watching, it's only going to be this pretty mug. So, Bruna, welcome. I know that, you first approached me, oh gosh, what, 2 years ago to come on air? And
I think so.
yeah, it's been a while since we first talked to one another, and you're in a good space now. So yeah, tell everybody who you are and what you're into, what makes you you, and let's just dive in and have a good old conversation.
All right. Hey everyone, my name is Bruna Neptune. I am a voiceover director and I am also an author. If you want to get into a genre, it would be horror. And I guess if there's any side hobbies, I like to do some photography, and I also like to do what is known as punch needling. I'm trying to get into that. It's kind of calming once you get into it.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I remember doing some of that when I was in, oh gosh, it was either junior high or ninth grade back in the 70s, when it was lots of really bright colors that, kind of clash actually.
yeah.
Yeah. So tell us rather a little bit about your story, Bruna. Are you, for people that have been following the podcast, some of the experts on my show have professional degrees, and other of the experts on my show have living experience.
Yes. So I grew up as a neurodivergent person. I would say that I do have fetal alcohol syndrome and I do have ADHD, but a word that I use is neurodivergent,
Mhm.
which is an easier term instead of explaining it all, because that's just because you don't have to, just
You don't have to get into
specify
the
what you have.
details.
Yeah, because then you have to ask all the questions and it gets really long
Yeah. Yeah.
because everyone is different.
Yeah. So some people go deep into the weeds on, parsing out words, neurodivergent versus diverse, but you prefer neurodivergent?
Yes.
Okay. People have reasons for having their preferences. Is that something that you care to talk about?
Yes. So I something I do, I'm one of the people who goes onto TikTok, of course. And something you'll usually see on the algorithm on TikTok, it depends on what you watch. Something that the videos that I watch are on neurodivergence,
Mhm.
and a word they like to use is neurodivergent people instead of being
Mhm.
like, because they show examples of what it's like for anyone who falls under that spectrum, like
Yeah,
autism, ADHD, because we all have something that might be similar, but we're all different, but we can all relate to it.
yeah, yeah. I find it so disheartening that, FASD is the leading preventable cause of intellectual disorders, learning disorders,
Hmm.
developmental delays, and yet we get left off that list of all the different types of neurodivergence.
Yes, because you can have a fetal alcohol syndrome, but you can also have something else on the side. So
Yeah.
it can be because I have ADHD and fetal alcohol syndrome, but both things affect me in two different ways.
Mhm.
Such as when I was growing up, when I was little, I struggled with math, and that was because I had fetal alcohol syndrome, and that
Mhm.
affected that, and so I had to do special education. And my ADHD, so my ADHD wasn't diagnosed for me until I was at least, I think I was about 7 or 8, because the teachers were kind of talking to my doing reports back to my mom and saying that they were noticing that I was just not really paying attention, and they were like, I think they were suggesting I might have ADHD. They're like, you might need to get your child checked out.
Mhm.
So that happened. At the time, I didn't know I was being diagnosed. They take you to the clinic
Yeah.
and everything, but I was too small to understand.
Yeah.
And I got diagnosed professionally with ADHD.
Okay. So there's a whole lot of overlap between the two. And in addition, there's a lot of comorbidity between those two, meaning so many of us with FASD also have, like you, the ADHD. Sometimes they just look like one another, but sometimes it's both. But you say you've identified ways that are distinct one from the other?
Yes. Something I learned about my ADHD is that, of course, if you're neurodivergent, whatever you have is not just going to go away. And sometimes when you get older in life, you start to recognize it actually can affect your adult life. Because when you're a kid, you really don't know what's going on because you're in such a safe space growing up when you're young.
Yeah,
Because that's what your parents do. They want to like give you a nice space so no one can judge you. But once you're thrown into the real world, you realize you're being thrown into a world of neurotypical people,
yeah.
people who don't have that. And then you start realizing I'm kind of different,
Mhm.
picking up in the adult world. And that's kind of what happened to me growing up. So,
Yeah, I was just sharing the other day when I was recording with my friend Catherine. She and I are both dual diagnosed FASD and ADHD. And, I was in my 50s when I started suspecting that I had FASD, and my mom confirmed it 60, and I was 60 when it was officially diagnosed. And
mm,
the clinician that was diagnosing me, I mentioned to her, I think I have ADHD because all these years, and even though I'm a professional, ADHD brought to me an image of course, I was in foster care, I wasn't a mental health therapist for, oh gosh, I haven't done therapy in probably 30 years. but I had in the image I had was, the little boys that are hyperactive and running all over the place. And that's definitely not me. I'm pretty sedentary. Um, but then, as I was learning, women are often diagnosed as adults with ADHD because we do look so different. Boys and girls look so different one from another with
Mhm.
ADHD. And learning that with women, it's more having a hyperactive mind.
Ah, yes.
The body, who cares what it's doing, right? But that mind is going a mile a minute. And, a good friend whom I confided that to, she started laughing at me. She said, I've known you had ADHD since I met you 7 years ago. But the diagnosis of FASD surprised most people because of all the images that people have. They tend to think only of FAS, not of the whole spectrum. They had no idea. Only 10% of us have the face, right? And
Yeah.
there's just so many myths out there and so much misinformation out there. What was growing up like for you, Bruna?
Growing up with as a neurodivergent child, so in my earliest years, I used to think I was like, like everyone else, that type of thing. Because, you don't want to just tell a child like you're completely different and everything. Because then they worry at such a young age and everything. And so, my mom and my parents, they were foster parents,
Mhm.
and they had experience with children who struggled with fetal alcohol syndrome. And I grew up in an environment where there were other kids who had struggles. So it wasn't entirely new to me, but growing up and I guess when I entered middle school, I guess that's when I discovered that I was kind of different. I would kind of isolate myself from the other kids, and the other kids would, like, I guess, see me as different. And even in elementary school, a lot of people, some of the other kids started to catch on that I was different. And unfortunately, I was kind of vulnerable to slight manipulation and stuff, like if a kid wanted something that I had, they would, use the soft voice and be like, I'm your friend, like, don't you want to give me this? And because I was so small and I didn't understand, I would give them what I what I had. I remember there was this toy that I got from McDonald's or something, and I gave it to this girl, and I would always slightly ask if I could have it back, but she would ignore me.
Mhm.
And I don't know, I was just kind of run over by some of the other kids growing up, and as you get older, as I got older, I started to understand what it was, and yeah, so my mom is the one who kind of broke to me that I had fetal alcohol syndrome, and she explained to me what it was. And I really never thought too much about it. And my mom was actually friends with Jody,
Oh, I
who you
know
probably know.
Jody.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Jody was actually a frequent visitor of our house
Yep.
growing up. So,
She's one of my
um,
closest friends.
yeah, she definitely knew my mom too. So those two are definitely friends. And Jody definitely helped with giving advice to my mom, you
Mhm.
know, on what, because you're raising a kid with fetal alcohol syndrome, and it's like, there's different stages of life, and it's gonna be different than just raising, a neurotypical child. So, I would say that um my parents did raise me well and my siblings, but I guess everything became, I guess my whole world kind of came crashing down once my mother was unfortunately diagnosed with lymphoma cancer back in, I believe it was late 2015, but I rem I remember just watching her health decline. I think like the first time we noticed something was actually wrong was when we saw her face just didn't look right. Like it was this almost orangish color.
Oh,
And yeah, and I guess I think she made a call to one of my older siblings, and they actually helped her go to the hospital so she could be diagnosed. And it was really hard to wrap our heads around because at the time we were living in Kentucky, and I was the eldest child considerably of the house,
mhm.
and I had three younger siblings at that time. My older, I think I have about one, two, three, but I think I have like four older siblings, but they're like living, you know, adult lives in other states. So, I basically had to kind of step up as the older sibling at that time. I think I wasn't even 20 at the time. So I was entering adulthood, and it was crazy because this is like the universe is like throwing you into this what's going on.
Yeah.
And yeah, so
That's hard enough even for neurotypical kids to assume a parenting role for siblings when they're not even 20.
yeah.
It's challenging and difficult and painful enough for neurotypicals. How much harder it must have been for you.
Yeah. Especially since I had like ADHD, and I think it was mostly my ADHD because something with my ADHD is that I'm what is known as selectively mute. That means if I'm not completely comfortable with whatever's going on, I'm quiet and stuff. And a lot of people mistake this as shyness. And
Mhm.
and it's hard for me to speak up. So at the time, all that stuff was happening, and I seemed pretty distant. I would always like all the hospital visits and everything. I would always have my headphones on, but it was because I didn't want to seem like I was in my own little world, but that's how I was currently coping at the time.
Yeah, I just get the sense that you were trapped inside with no way of communicating.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's a very lonely existence. How long did that go on for?
Well, I guess it went on for until okay, so my mom, her health, we were just hoping for a miracle of some sort
Mhm.
because she was battling the lymphoma cancer.
Mhm.
And we, what happened was that the doctor broke the news that the cancer had officially hit her brain. And that
Oh,
was when, like, there was, like, once it hits the brain, because the brain is literally the system of your body that
yeah.
controls everything. And once that cancer attacks the brain, like, there's little to no chance. And
Not
I
what
still,
anyone wants to hear.
yeah, I still, being in that stage of life was pretty surreal to me at the time. I actually was going through it. I actually ended up embracing my goth phase at that time.
Okay.
So that was what happened because it's like
Is that what
I
got
didn't,
you into writing horror?
yeah, basically I
Okay.
wasn't actually allowed to write any horror with around when my mom was alive and stuff, but I think that came later. But I was into like gothic stuff. I would listen to one of the bands that I would listen to as my mother's health was declining was called Gill, and they're a German goth band. And even now, as I look back at their songs, it just reminds me of the time that was all happening.
Yeah.
And uh, So
What do you listen
my
to now, 10 years later?
what I listen to now is I guess it's called hardstyle. It's a type of music that's kind of uh, I think it kind of got a little more popular through mainstream and such. So
Okay. Uh,
so
So was your dad around through all this? Was he supportive at all?
yes, he was. Oh my gosh, he really was. I'll never forget this moment. This is a moment that I don't really think I told my my family members, but I think I can reveal it now. So it was just my dad and I, and he drove us to the hospital to visit mom. And my mom, this was just probably the last time I ever spoke to her clearly. And she was just so aware and so awake. And I remember just she greeted us. She said, "Oh, hi," and stuff. And she looked at me and and I hugged her and I said, I was actually kind of slightly like crying a bit when I hugged her, and she was wondering like, oh, like why are you crying? It's like I wish you would come home. It's like, oh, I wish I I did too, sweetie. Um and just a few minutes went by, and that oh, like that awareness she had just vanished,
Mhm.
and like her body just kind of shut down again, and she was just sleeping, you know.
Mhm.
And I remember walking to because every hospital room has a bathroom. I remember walking to the bathroom and looking into the mirror and just breaking down crying
Yeah.
because it's like you realize in that moment, like, that might be one of the last times she ever like talks to you or
And
says
it
your
was,
name.
wasn't it?
Yes, I realized that.
Yeah.
Later on, like all the other visits, our mom did talk to us, but she was too weak. And what happened when she finally passed, I wasn't there, unfortunately, at the time with her at the hospital, but she passed away I um sometime in the fall of 2016. And we had a family friend over at the house, and she had to break the news to me and to my younger sister at the time, because she was also at the house, that our mother passed. And that was, I guess that was the first time of me grieving. So yeah. And um our dad also wasn't having he was also in grieving, because that was his wife. He's been married to her, loyal to her. And my sister and I were basically the only ones living at the house back in Kentucky at the time. And I remember there was this one time, sorry, dad was, okay, so there was this time my dad was at his desk, and he was just crying and feeling alone. And I didn't say anything, but I just went to him and I just put my arms around him and I was just crying with him.
Yeah.
And something, unfortunately, that some people thought was that I wasn't, I guess, paying attention. But growing up as a neurodivergent person, it's like sometimes it's hard to show emotion, you know?
Mhm.
And it was just a really hard time to go through at that
Yeah.
moment.
It's also hard for us to be able to put words to emotions a lot of the time. And that
Yeah,
can make grieving even more complicated.
yeah. Like some people mistake that I didn't care. It
Mm.
wasn't there, but it's like, um, that's the people who are neurodivergent, sometimes it's hard for us to show our emotions. Like we do have emotions, but it's hard for us to like show it. But that was just one one of the moments I had with my dad as he was grieving. And um I guess we at the house in Kentucky, it was just me, my younger sister, and my dad for a while, but pretty soon um my dad's health started to decline.
Oh,
I
no.
think, yeah, and that's pretty soon he couldn't drive anymore. It became kind of dangerous. So I had another sister at the time who also took up driving. So she had help a bit before she had to go. I think she had to go down to Colorado, stay down there for a while.
Mhm.
But our older sister explained to us that our father's health was declining and he just couldn't it was like time for him to retire, you know?
Yeah.
So what was going to happen was that he was going to go move up to Minnesota. My sister and I were going to stay at the house for a while until everything's situated.
Mhm.
And my dad went to a retirement home, and this is basically how I ended up back in Minnesota.
Mhm.
Um, I ended up staying with my older brother and his wife, um, in their house back up in Minnesota. And on my dad's health just kept declining, and unfortunately, he ended up passing away. Not even, I think it was basically the next year after 2016, but I'm glad he almost made it to the next year. He made it to like December, which is kind of amazing because it's like I feel like he was holding on
Mhm.
that long, even though he would, because it's like, I guess, yeah, I think he was just holding on for that long.
Yeah.
And um and after it wrapped around my head that I was considered what is known as an adult orphan, as some would
Mhm.
say. Um
Yeah, because you're in your 20s.
yeah, I was just 20, just entering,
Oh.
I was at that age where you have to enter the world. And unfortunately, a side effect that happened after my dad died, like I actually went numb. I really I
Mhm.
didn't cry or anything. And even at the I th- it wasn't at the funeral, but it's where you get to like see the body for the last,
The
because
viewing.
my
Mhm.
yeah, my mom was cremated and we were gonna have our father cremated as well. So it was the last time we ever got to see his body, and I just was numb.
Yeah.
And I remember my older sister going to me and saying like, it's okay to cry. It's okay for you to cry. But I was like, I'm now trying to wrap my head around what's currently going on. So after
So,
uh
so they were your adoptive parents, and and there were several children. Were all of you like adopted from different biological families,
uh
or were you part of a sibling set that was adopted?
well, when it came to me, I actually came with my two older brothers, and later on my youngest sister ended up entering the family,
Mhm.
and she was from what I know, she is the was the last child of my birth mother.
So at 20 years old, you've basically lost four parents.
Yeah, but
Oh.
unfortunately my birth mother and my birth father really weren't the best people. I
Hmm.
really don't give everyone's different, but I really don't give them the title of being my mom and dad. I actually just
Hmm.
call them by their first name. I
Okay.
know some people will say that's rude, but it's like I want
It
to
is
just
what
give
it
credit.
is.
Yeah, I want to give credit to the two humans who raised me,
Raised you.
like they basically fought for me. Like something that happened when I was like, because I came to them as an infant
Okay.
and I was a failure to thrive baby, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And
Thanks
the
to the
doctors,
FASD.
yep. And the
Mhm.
doctors basically told my parents that either like either I'm gonna have a feeding tube for the rest of my life or I might end up dying.
Oh,
Because it's
wow.
like, because I was like not eating at all, basically.
Yeah.
And um my parents basically fought for me to basically be where I am right now. And that's
Yeah.
honestly why I'm so grateful for my life today, because it's like
Yeah.
these two fought for you.
They really poured themselves into you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
What a blessing and what a miracle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And in 10
yes.
years, you still miss them, I'm sure.
Yeah. After the funeral of my parents, we had them both cremated, and since my dad was a veteran, we had, the soldier the soldiers with the guns, they do
Hmm.
that
The
thing.
21 gun salute.
Yep, for my dad. Um and I basically started something that I ended up having was something called hyper independence,
Mhm.
which is can happen a lot to people who have experienced a traumatic effect,
Mhm.
an event. And um I've gotten a bit better, but um growing up, when I was just 20, I lived with my brother, and he helped me get my first job. And I realized that I actually loved being independent, because I'm not saying I grew up completely sheltered, but I kind of grew up with um an overprotective mom, as I would
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
which I understand now because I'm like thrown into the adult world. And
Yeah.
so, yeah. And as I got something that I thought that I would never get back was my love for writing.
Hmm.
But after my parents passed away, at the time, I was really into the artist known as Bruno Mars.
Hmm.
And basically, that's an artist that really helped me get through everything. And it was because of him, I ended up making a character known as Gore, who ended up being a character that stayed with me for a long time. And to this day, I actually never knew that this character would help me through like being an adult. And
Hmm.
today I'm actually like working on a project. Like I said, I'm a voiceover director, and I work with voice actors. I'm also like considered a voice actor myself. And now I'm working with voice actors who are going to help me bring my story to life. I'm also working with a webcomic artist. I'm
Nice.
the one writing the scripts and everything. And now I'm looking back and being like, wow, I'm so glad I didn't give up on this character.
Yeah. What do you imagine, like if we had a couple empty chairs in the room with us, assuming we were in the same physical space and not separated by, several hundred miles with you in Minnesota and me in North Dakota. But if
Yeah.
we were face to face and had a couple empty room or empty chairs in the room with us and your parents were in them, what do you imagine they would say looking at your successes in life at this point, that you are writing, that you are doing the voiceovers, and a voiceover producer? What words do you hear coming from them?
Well, for the first thing, my mom did not let me get into horror. Something I did. Oh, I had an iPad, and something I would do is watch horror movies
Mm.
and stuff to kind of feed that. I think she kind of knew, but yeah, she didn't like horror. But if I think now that she would understand who Gore is and how this character has helped me so much, she would not stop me from writing this because it's like, look at where I am now, look at what I'm doing. I'm actually now the owner of my own small business. Like I have the EIN.
Congratulations on that.
Yeah, the EIN and all that.
Huh?
So it just feels so surreal to have this life. I guess my parents would say that they are proud of me.
Sounds like they
And
would be.
yeah, like I'm doing stuff that I thought I wouldn't. Because if you told my younger self that I'm doing what I'm doing now, they would have looked at you and went, "What? That doesn't seem like what? I'm in my room. Like I barely get
This
out." It's
lady's
like,
cray cray.
yeah, and it's like right now I still am considered, in my room, but it's like I'm writing and stuff. I'm not looking at a wall anymore,
Yeah,
being like, what am I doing with my life? Because
yeah.
it just feels good to be because I'm almost 30 and I know there's still a lot of things to learn, but I feel more secure about myself than I did back then. And
Hmm.
it's like I can say who I am and what I do now.
Yeah.
And it I'm still learning how to love myself. I do love myself, but it can take years. And
Yeah.
I also have something called PMDD, which can sometimes affect my brain and stuff.
So,
And
Kim, do you mind telling everyone what that stands for?
yes, PMDD stands for premenstrual uh deficit disorder.
Okay.
And basically what happens, it's something that can be self-diagnosed. You really don't need to go to a doctor for it because doctors know about what is known as PMS, which is
Hmm.
a more common term. But PMDD is when it's actually it can get pretty dangerous. And I I had symptoms showing more when I was around 25, and I would just have these moments where I just hated my life and I felt so depressed, but it was weird because I didn't hate my life, but I loved my life, but it was like, wait, this doesn't seem like me, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And I then after I would have my monthly and everything, I would feel normal again. And then I discovered about PMDD and I was like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It's amazing how sensitive we can be to the most minute changes in our hormonal balance.
yeah.
Yeah.
And basically for me, how I would describe it, it's not me against myself, it's my brain
Mhm.
against myself. That's what I would describe
Mhm.
PMDD to get on a
Mhm.
more understanding level.
Yeah.
And it was I've always one of the things that can help with your PMDD is birth control. And I was like a lot of people, I was nervous about taking it, but once I started taking it the as my main medication to help control those hormones and everything, I felt myself getting back on track and everything. And that really
And then your
helped in the end.
emotions came back in line and yeah. Yeah. Yeah, hormones are very, very powerful, and very minute amounts can make such a massive difference. Like, for instance, the hormone insulin, my body doesn't make it anymore, I believe, because of the alcohol exposure from when I was in but the amount of alcohol for like the head of a pin will keep me alive. But if I do it to the size of three pinheads, it could kill me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible how concentrated these hormones can be and how radically they can affect, our moods, so many things, even physically, because of that hormonal fluctuation. It comes, and of course there's a lot of stereotypes about women and their monthly cycles and how crazy they can get during their cycle, right? With the PMS or whatever. But there's other hormones that can have huge physical impacts too, like the thyroid hormones.
Yeah.
They have a lot to do with our weight, with our energy level, with our wakefulness. They're all so powerful, and it just shows you how immeasurably complicated and complex our brains and our bodies are. So if you think
Yeah.
about that and think about the damage of the alcohol exposure, affecting, and there's no way to plan what parts of the brain it's going to affect. It's like an IED explosive going off in the baby's brain. There's
Yeah.
just the effects can be so far ranging and so powerful.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
it's the battle with PMDD never really ends, but you can control it.
Mhm.
And I wouldn't trade my life for anything. But the PMDD is that kind of like that voice. As some people say that it's like, you like you're a failure and that type of stuff. And I'm doing a lot better with it and controlling it and everything. And unfortunately, sometime last year, I had a severe PMDD episode, and unfortunately, I was online during it. And I guess that's when, as you mentioned before, the cyberbullying started happening.
Mhm.
Yeah, because
Were you getting a lot of hateful messages from other people?
unfortunately, I did. I wouldn't say I was addicted to social media at all, but there was an incident, unfortunately, that happened between me and someone else. I'm not going to mention names, of course.
Yeah, please
Um,
don't.
yeah, I won't, of course. But there was somebody that I guess we were in a fight of some sort, and somebody else decided to say something, and she and I worked together on a few projects, and I I messaged her privately, of course, but in that moment, my PMDD was affecting my anger and everything. And I ended up telling her that I don't want to work with her anymore because the way she was responding to everything just wasn't right to me.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, there was also a language barrier. So I guess she kind of took it as something else. And she um started, I didn't know at the time, but apparently there were unfortunately different group chats within this I would say it was considered a fandom. And I guess she started telling everyone what was happening from her side, and so many people got mixed up. No one really wanted to hear what
Your
my
side.
side was.
Mhm.
And I think there was only two people that I talked to who actually do, like, a voice call with me
Mhm.
to calm me down and to understand. And one of them was basically told me you you need to just be quiet for now and
Mhm.
just let this whole thing run over. And
Mhm.
they said, unfortunately, it might be hard for you to come back to this fandom.
Yeah.
It's like you can try, but there's a lot of people that really don't like you anymore.
Yeah.
And it's like I didn't really want to mention my PMDD anymore because it's like so many people on Twitter, unfortunately, use their, I guess, their mental illnesses and stuff to get away with stuff, unfortunately, and that makes the people like us look bad.
Yeah.
So I stayed quiet, but unfortunately, I did see like everyone's conversations, the threads and everything. Someone said like, "Oh, we'll make sure Bruna never comes back here. We'll make sure that they feel like they don't belong here and everything." And I went through such a depressive state,
Yeah.
but I decided that I would just go back into a safer community because
Mhm.
that's the thing with if you're on Twitter and social media is that you can just find a different community to be in. It might be harder to like feel more safe, but it depends
Mhm.
on who you're interacting with.
Yeah.
And I decided to, I never really jumped into the voiceover community completely before, but now I did, and I feel more safe
Mm.
because it's like there's so many communities, and if one community says something about someone else within another community, there's a whole, I guess, a fight going on, and that's something that we don't really want to see happen. And now I feel more safe
Good.
on social media now because I'm connected to people who do make me feel safe and people that I
Good.
do trust, um especially like the voice over actors that I'm working with. I'm not friends with all the voice actors, but I guess there's like one or two that do make me help me feel safe. And it's good to feel safe and appreciated within a
Yeah.
community and they can see how hard you're working and everything.
Yeah. So what goals do you have left that you want to shoot for?
Well, if there's any type of goal, I would say right now Candy Gore creation is my current passion project, as some would say. That is a goal that I'm working on right now.
Mhm.
Getting that completed. Working with an artist is you have to be like very patient with them because they're the ones doing the artwork and sometimes it can be a while.
Mhm.
And I'm just so grateful for the team that I am currently working with and it just feels so good to be doing what I'm doing today.
That's awesome. That's awesome. If you were to look back and give some advice to the younger Bruna, what would you tell her? How would you encourage her?
I would tell them uh that life doesn't get easier, but there are ways that you can make it, that you can cope with life struggles. Basically, hug like love your parents as much as you can. I wouldn't break the what is gonna happen to little me.
Yeah.
Um, sometimes I am connected to my inner child at times. A lot of the times my family members do tell me that I do have an innocent personality, what
Mhm.
is known as a soft soul. That's what I try.
Yeah.
I do my best to be.
Yeah. Yeah. So for folks who are listening or watching that have maybe just begun to consider that maybe alcohol touches their life from, before they were born, um, what would you tell them to encourage them?
I would say that have there are more there's more ways to be open about what you have, um, especially like on like social media and stuff, um, such as TikTok, as I mentioned before, because um, a lot of the times it's hard to be like have what you have, but you shouldn't be ashamed of what you have because it's like it's not your fault. It's it's something that your mother ended up doing when you were developing in the womb.
Oftentimes without knowing.
Yeah. It's like it's sometimes it does seem like a curse, but it's like just because you're a little different growing up and everything doesn't mean that something's wrong with you, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a pretty important point.
Yeah, if you're everyone is born with a reason, for
Mhm.
purpose, you know? I
Mhm.
know that's a cheesy line that's a lot of people say, but
Oh,
honestly,
but
once
it's
you
so
think about it,
true. Yeah.
yeah, but it's so true.
Yeah. I've always had the belief that, well, not always, because I came to faith in the late 70s. But since that time, I've always had the belief that when I have fulfilled the purpose for which God created me, then He will allow me to go to sleep and wake up resurrection morning. I'll have done my job so I can rest. And
Yeah.
because there's so many times when the diabetes could have taken me out, except that obviously he had a purpose for me and he sent his angels to wake me up sometimes. Sometimes it was through a middle of the night phone call or, wrong number or just all these random things. But it was enough to know that, wow, this always happens when my sugar goes low. To know that I was being saved for a reason. And yeah, it can be so much easier to make it through the tough times in life when we feel called for a purpose.
Yeah. Like for me, I am indigenous. I'm from I'm Lakota, and something that I've also been looking into is being proud of who I am with my culture. And
Mhm.
it's so hard to be indigenous, especially if you're mixed. I'm also considered a mix because my birth father was he was Mexican, Hispanic. So it's been hard to find where I stand between that. And
Where
it's
you
like,
fit, you know?
yeah, where you fit. And one of my inspirations is the actress called Devery Jacobs. She's so vocal about the indigenous struggles, and it was through her that I wanted to be more vocal about who I am as an indigenous person.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, Candy Gore is indigenous Hispanic, so
Okay.
it that's another important thing about this character. It's like he's not just a character, it's especially with media, we need more indigenous representation
Mhm.
within all types of media. I still have yet to watch the series, but I've watched clips of it. And there's this show called Reservation Dogs,
Mhm.
and
I've heard of that.
yeah, it's actually a really good show. And it although it's like although the actors are not actually from the tribe that they're representing, they're still representing being indigenous because they all come from different indigenous backgrounds. And for me, that also helps me be proud of who I am. It's like
Mhm.
because my ancestors, if you look into the background of indigenous people, it's like they fought so hard. Like they went through the struggles, they went through starvation. And it's like once you think about it, it's like they fought for me to be here today,
Yeah.
you know? And that's one of the things that helps me be grateful for my life and be like, wow, they went through all
Yeah.
that and here I am breathing and living today.
Yeah. Yeah. I wish that all of us could have that kind of gratitude. So many of us, I think, in our society are just plain spoiled, you know,
Yeah.
and so I mean, there's various things that can wake us up out of that, right? Certainly,
Yeah.
having that family history and legacy of really tough times can help us develop that attitude of gratitude. Having a scare with cancer and fighting it and coming out victorious on the other side can really have that same result in the same attitude of gratitude. or in your other situation where, being so young and burying both of your parents,
Yeah.
that's not a call to appreciate life while you have it, right? Then what would be? So, you've had a lot of struggles and a lot of hardships, but also many, many blessings.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this show is mostly for people who are living with fetal alcohol spectrum disorders of one type or another, or suspecting that they are. But there are parents that listen or watch. Is there anything, looking back over your life and the way that your parents, supported you through your struggles, whether it's through the bullying or whether it was just through, feeling different at school, whatever, is there any advice from how your parents supported you that you can pass on to other parents who are raising kiddos on the spectrum?
Well, one of the things that my mother would tell me is that she would share some of I guess, the history of my birth mother. Um, not not too much at the time because I was still young, but that like it's yes, she drank alcohol when I was developing, but it's like I can be different, growing up. And it's that's the most important thing to remember because unfortunately some people with a fetal alcohol syndrome, when they get like I guess when they get to the struggling part of their life, they end up turning to alcohol themselves, unfortunately. And I'm actually really fortunate to not, I've never drank any alcohol or done anything like that growing up. And a lot,
You're
yeah,
not missing
and
much.
it's like, unfortunately, even in my 20s, there's a thing called considered what is known as a second puberty when you're in your 20s. And what happens is that that's the stage where so many people are pressuring you to
Mhm.
be drinking alcohol. And I did feel the peer pressure of it, but something I always clung to was when my mom told me that she tried alcohol once and she said how disgusting it tasted. And I clung to that ever since. And that was one of the reasons I'm like, okay, I don't want to even try it.
That's probably one of the best things she could have ever told you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bruna, I am so grateful that you reached out to say, I'm in a place now where I can record with you. I'm so glad that we were able to find this time where we could sit down one another and just talk and get your story out there so that you can be a tremendous encourager of others. Going through that
Hmm.
transition into adulthood, it's hard for anybody, but especially for those of us who have lost our families of origin and maybe have also lost our next families as well. You've had tremendous losses already, and you've done it with the deck stacked against you. And look at you now. You've come through the
Yeah.
other side. You're not far from 30, and it's this next decade, I think, is just going to be a fantastic one for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. And we'll have you back on again sometime, okay?
Yeah, that would be great.
All right. Thanks, Bruna.
Yep.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Living with FASD Candid Conversations with Patti Kasper. Feel free to send comments, questions, and topics you'd like to learn more about, hear more about, to me at livingwithfasdpodcast@gmail.com. Please remember to like, follow and share this podcast on whatever platform you use so that more people can find the podcast. Have a blessed week, everyone, and tune in next Monday for another candid conversation on living with FASD.